Most people think they know Jamie Dornan and Dakota Johnson, the red carpets, the interviews, the carefully curated public image. But what if the most meaningful part of their story has been happening quietly, far away from cameras, where no one was really looking? Behind the fame, behind the headlines, there exists a side of their lives that feels almost deliberately hidden, a journey shaped not by spotlight, but by something far more human. It didn't begin as a grand, public mission. In fact, for both Jamie and Dakota, their involvement in philanthropy started in ways that were almost invisible to the public eye. Small actions, private donations, quiet visits, moments that never made it into headlines, yet carried a weight that would eventually shape how they saw the world beyond Hollywood. For Jamie, those early steps were deeply personal. Known for his reserved nature, he often chose causes that aligned with issues close to his heart, particularly those involving children and families in vulnerable situations. Instead of simply lending his name, he showed up, sometimes without media, without announcement, spending time, listening, and engaging in ways that felt genuine rather than performative. Dakota's path carried a similar quiet intensity, though expressed in her own distinct way. She became involved in initiatives focused on mental health, women's support systems, and humanitarian efforts that extended beyond borders. What stood out wasn't just her participation, but her willingness to step into uncomfortable spaces, to hear stories that weren't easy, and to remain present in moments that couldn't be summarized in a single photograph. What makes their journeys particularly compelling is how naturally they seemed to evolve. Neither of them framed it as a rebranding of their image or a strategic move. Instead, it felt like a gradual shift, one that came from exposure to realities that couldn't be ignored once seen up close. The more they experienced, the more difficult it became to return to a life that existed only within the boundaries of film sets and premieres. There were moments that stayed with them, moments that quietly changed something inside. For Jamie, it was said to be an encounter with a family whose resilience in the face of hardship left him questioning the meaning of success. For Dakota, it was meeting individuals whose stories challenged her understanding of privilege, forcing her to confront how much of the world exists outside the narratives she had grown up around. These experiences didn't turn into dramatic public statements or emotional speeches. Instead, they translated into continued action, consistent, intentional, and often unseen. Projects were supported, organizations were uplifted, and time was given in ways that couldn't be measured by headlines or social media engagement. It was philanthropy that didn't ask for attention, which in itself made it stand out. Interestingly, there were rare moments when their paths seemed to intersect within this space. Not in a highly publicized collaboration, but in shared values that hinted at a deeper alignment. Events where both appeared, causes that overlapped, and a mutual understanding that doing something meaningful didn't require it to be visible. It added another layer to their already complex connection, one rooted not just in shared work, but in a similar perspective on responsibility. What truly elevates their story is the contrast it creates. On one side, there's the world that audiences see, glamorous, controlled, and often detached from everyday struggles. On the other, there's this quieter reality where both Jamie and Dakota step into environments that are raw, unpredictable, and deeply human. That contrast doesn't just highlight their actions, it gives them context, making them feel less like celebrities participating in charity, and more like individuals trying to understand their place in a much larger world. There was one particular moment, described by those who witnessed it, that seemed to capture the essence of this journey. It wasn't staged, it wasn't announced, and it wasn't meant for public consumption. It was simply a moment of connection, one where the distance between celebrity and human being disappeared completely. And in that moment, it became clear that whatever they were doing, it wasn't about recognition. By the time people began to notice this side of their lives, the journey was already well underway. It hadn't been introduced with a statement or defined by a campaign. It had grown quietly, shaped by experiences that changed how they saw the world and their role within it. And perhaps that's what makes it so powerful. Because sometimes, the most inspiring stories aren't the ones that are told loudly. They're the ones that unfold in silence, built on choices that don't seek attention, but end up meaning far more because of it. As more people began to discover this quieter side of Jamie Dornan and Dakota Johnson, the conversation slowly shifted from curiosity to admiration. What initially felt surprising, two globally recognized actors working behind the scenes without seeking attention, started to reveal something much deeper about their intentions. Because in a world where visibility often equals value, choosing to remain understated carries a different kind of meaning. What sets their journey apart isn't just the causes they support, but the way they choose to engage with them. For both Jamie and Dakota, philanthropy doesn't seem to function as an extension of their public image, but rather as a separate, more personal space where authenticity matters more than recognition. They don't rely on large announcements or carefully timed campaigns, and that absence of spectacle creates a sense of sincerity that's difficult to replicate. There's also something important in the way they approach giving, not just as a transaction, but as a relationship. Instead of limiting their involvement to financial contributions, they invest time, attention, and emotional presence. That kind of involvement changes the dynamic entirely, turning charity into connection, and transforming impact into something that feels tangible rather than distant. For Dakota, this often translates into her willingness to engage directly with sensitive issues, particularly those that require listening rather than speaking. Her approach suggests an understanding that real change doesn't always come from visibility, but from consistency. By staying present in spaces that are often overlooked, she reinforces the idea that meaningful impact isn't defined by scale, but by intention. Jamie, on the other hand, brings a quiet steadiness to his efforts, reflecting the same grounded personality he's known for. His contributions may not always be visible, but they carry a sense of continuity, an ongoing commitment rather than a one-time gesture. That consistency creates trust, not just within the communities he supports, but also among those who begin to recognize the pattern behind his actions. What makes the combined influence particularly compelling is how naturally it resonates with people. There's no sense of performance, no attempt to inspire through dramatic storytelling or emotional appeal. Instead, the inspiration comes from the simplicity of what they do, showing up, staying involved, and allowing their actions to speak without needing constant acknowledgement. The impact of this approach extends beyond the immediate causes they support. It subtly challenges the expectations placed on public figures, suggesting that influence doesn't have to be loud to be effective. In fact, the journey seems to suggest the opposite, that the most meaningful contributions often happen when no one is watching. For those who follow their story, there's a shift in perspective that takes place. It becomes less about what Jamie and Dakota are doing specifically, and more about what their choices represent. They offer a different model of engagement, one that prioritizes depth over visibility and purpose over perception. By the time you step back and look at the bigger picture, the real story isn't just about two celebrities involved in philanthropy. It's about how they've redefined what that involvement can look like. Not as a statement, not as a performance, but as an ongoing, evolving journey shaped by experiences, values, and a quiet sense of responsibility. And maybe that's what makes it so inspiring. Not the scale of what they've done, but the way they've chosen to do it, without noise, without expectation, and without needing the world to notice in order for it to matter. By the time you step back and look at the bigger picture, the real story isn't just about two celebrities involved in philanthropy. It's about how they've redefined what that involvement can look like. Not as a statement, not as a performance, but as an ongoing, evolving journey shaped by experiences, values, and a quiet sense of responsibility.